The industrial accident looked like something out of a nightmare. A man's arm was hanging by splinters of muscle and bone, too mangled even to recognize it first. When paramedic Elena Vargas made the split-second call to amputate on site, she knew no one wanted to hear it. But the alternative was death. Before diving in, tell us where you're watching from. And if you want more gripping real-life stories like this, hit subscribe and ring that bell. Now buckle up. The ambulance bay of Metro General Hospital could have been mistaken for a war zone. Blood pooled faster than the drainage grates could handle, oozing dark and relentless across the sterile floor. Elena didn't flinch. Her hands moved with a precision honed on battlefields far from here. There was no time to hesitate. Michael Torres was the construction worker, mid-40s, with eyes that rolled back in agony as he clawed helplessly at what remained of his shattered left arm. A mangled femur peered through shredded flesh, grisly and unreal. Elena's partner, Luis Ortega, was calling for backup on the radio, voice tight with urgency. But Elena's focus narrowed to the bone, a splintered mess embedded with debris. "Get me a scalpel," she said. Luis froze, shocked. "Scalpel? Now? We're not surgeons." She didn't answer. Orders came from years of habit and necessity. "Just get it. Sterile kit. Keep it ready." A nurse appeared, eyes wide beneath her mask, name tag reading Jordan Hayes. She looked at Elena, then at the limb, uncertain. Seconds ticked. The man was losing consciousness, lips turning gray. Shock wasn't waiting. Elena's fingers danced deftly, slicing through tissue in smooth, practiced strokes. She severed the limb cleanly, artery clamped, stump irrigated and packed with gauze soaked in saline and antibiotics. No second guessing, no flinching. The room fell momentarily silent, except for the labored breathing of Michael Torres, now stable. Dr. Martin Cross arrived, eyes narrowing at the makeshift amputation on the floor. "You performed a field amputation without a physician present," Cross barked, voice dripping with disbelief and disdain. "That's not your call. He was bleeding out," Elena said evenly, peeling off her gloves. "There wasn't time." "Paramedic," Cross spat the word as if it were an insult. Elena met his gaze unflinching. "He's alive because I made that call." Cross's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, the bay shifted as another emergency roared in. Cries, chaos, the sound of trauma awakening anew. Later in the break room, Elena sat in a dim corner, exhausted but alert. She barely stirred the protein bar in her hands. Nearby, residents whispered about her audacity and risks, as if she'd committed a crime instead of saving a life. Jordan Hayes poured coffee silently, sliding into the seat across from Elena. "They don't know what they're talking about," she said softly. Elena shrugged. "They're not wrong. I broke protocol. But you saved him." Hayes's gaze was steady, curious. Elena's mind flickered to a faded tattoo, a navy caduceus with an anchor she kept hidden beneath sleeves. She hadn't shared that story in years. Not here. Not now. Her attention snapped to the ambulance bay as a new patient was wheeled in. Military fatigue stark against hospital whites. Sergeant First Class Ethan Blake. His name tag was clear, even from a distance. Elena's heart skipped. Something old stirred. A buried past she'd kept folded tight away. Luis caught her eye, restrained but questioning. No words passed, but the hospital air tightened around them. Elena's secret wasn't as buried as she hoped. The trauma staff readied around Blake, who lay unconscious, his left leg a fractured, bandaged mess from a training accident. His eyes fluttered open, and for a heartbeat, he searched the room, his gaze locking on Elena. Recognition flickered. Elena swallowed hard, steadying herself. The war had found her again. If you want to hear more stories like this, stories of courage hidden beneath the surface, hit subscribe and tell me where you're watching from in the comments. Your support means everything. Sergeant First Class. Ethan Blake's eyes fluttered open in the pale fluorescent light of the ICU, his voice shaking as he called out, "You're Elena." Paramedic Elena Vargas, sitting rigid at the bedside, felt the air thicken around her. "I'm," she began, but he cut her off. "The medic from Fallujah, the one who spoke Arabic. You saved us." Her breath caught. For years, she'd buried that past deep beneath paramedic protocols and civilian trauma calls. But here it was, alive and insistent. Blake's voice was raw and urgent, the memories vivid in his gaze. Remnants of explosions, relentless heat, pressed earth, and gunfire echoing through his mind. Elena closed her eyes briefly, recalling the chaos from almost 2 decades ago. A sudden mortar barrage had shattered the fragile silence of a blistering desert afternoon. Her squad caught in a deadly ambush. Blown debris, screams, the burning smell of oil and sand. She'd been Corporal Vargas then, a combat medic, the only lifeline between survival and death for those Marines. She remembered Blake lying prone beneath shattered beams, his eyes pleading, blood soaking his uniform, trapped under carnage. She'd applied a chest seal under mortar fire, directing evacuation with grit no civilian training covered. Back in the hospital room, Blake's hand twitched toward her, a fragile thread binding their 2 worlds. "Why aren't you still with the Corps?" he asked. Elena swallowed hard, voice low. "I had to walk away." Blake's expression hardened. "You saved 5 of us that day, Elena. We talked about you until our voices were hoarse." Her gaze dropped to the IV lines, to the antiseptic smell mingling with hospital sterility. How much did he know? How much could she risk? Nurse Jordan Hayes, standing partially behind the doorway, watched silently, eyes narrowed in suspicion. She knew something was different about Elena, something waiting to surface. The air shifted again. Dr. Martin Cross, Chief of Trauma Surgery, entered briskly. His sharp gaze locked onto Blake, then slid to Elena, lingering just a beat too long on the expression that had betrayed her secret. "He's awake," Elena said, voice steady. "We should monitor him closely." Cross nodded curtly, but his mind raced. He'd heard snippets, whispers about Elena's murky past, her impromptu battlefield medicine. Now the puzzle pieces were fitting into a picture he couldn't control. His resolve hardened to push her out for the hospital's sake. Blake tilted his head, trying to piece together a stranger who felt unbearably familiar. "Back in Fallujah," he said hesitantly. "Your voice got me through the worst night of my life." Elena's eyes shimmered briefly with a sadness she worked hard to mask. It wasn't just that night. She remembered every detail. The explosion near the Sunni neighborhood. The platoon ambushed while helping civilians caught in crossfire. The crackling radio calls. The screaming gunfire drowning out everything else. She remembered leading the wounded through rubble-strewn alleys, the smell of warm blood and sweat, and the faces that haunted her dreams. Blake gripped her hand lightly, the hospital machinery humming around them. "I told my squad leader, they're coming to see you, Rodriguez and the others. They want to thank you." Elena's breath hitched. She looked away, voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not who they think I am anymore." But the truth was beginning to unravel. As Blake drifted into a fitful sleep, Elena remained at his side, the ghosts of Fallujah stirring anew inside her. Outside, footsteps approached. The hospital's sterile routine interrupted by the unfolding storm that was her hidden history. Luis approached Elena quietly in the staff room later, concern shadowing his face. "You froze when Blake walked in," he said, voice low. Elena shook her head, brushing away the past like dust. "He's just a patient. Not to you," Luis said softly. "You carry that war with you." She looked at him, weary, yet unyielding. "I'm just a paramedic now." But deep down she knew some stories never ended. They only waiting to be told. The tension in the narrow office crackled like static electricity as Dr. Martin Cross faced Elena Vargas, his voice low but cold. "You didn't disclose your military service. That omission is a violation of protocol." Elena met his gaze, steady but unyielding. "It wasn't required." Cross leaned forward, his fingers steepled. "And yet, you repeatedly performed medical procedures well beyond the scope of your certification. Field amputations, needle decompressions, combat medicine." "I did what was necessary to save lives," Elena said softly. But conviction edged every word. "If that's reckless, then maybe protocols are broken." Cross's eyes darkened. "You put the hospital at legal risk. If one of those patients had died due to unauthorized interventions, the fallout would have been catastrophic. Elena's fists clenched beneath the table. Those patients are alive because of me. Cross's gaze sharpened. You're suspended pending a thorough administrative review. The words hit like a blow. Elena inhaled deeply, her jaw tightening. She rose slowly, composure barely masking frustration. So this is how you thank someone who saves lives? Before Cross could reply, the tones of a mass casualty alert pierced the silence. A residential building collapse. Multiple victims reported. Cross barked sharply. This isn't the time for insubordination, Vargas. You're off duty. Elena's eyes hardened. Lives don't wait for paperwork. She grabbed her worn jump kit, the weight familiar and grounding, and strode to the ambulance bay where Luis waited, already geared up and grim-faced. Whatever's next, we face it together, Luis said quietly. Outside, chaos reigned. Dust hung thick in the air. Screamed orders sliced through the turmoil, and families stood stunned amidst ruins. Elena moved with military precision, assessing, triaging, commanding. She scanned fractured concrete and twisted metal for survivors, the ticking clock of life counting down with every breath. A sudden cry reached her ears. A child trapped beneath debris. Crawling toward the sound, Elena discovered a 10-year-old boy, legs crushed, consciousness flickering. No one leaves, she muttered, pressing her hands against a severed artery, fighting to stem the pulse of bleeding and despair. Flames licked nearby, and the building groaned. Firefighters yelled orders to evacuate. Elena refused to relinquish her hold. Nurse Jordan Hayes arrived wielding supplies and resolve, backing Elena with unwavering support. Minutes stretched into an eternity as they worked to stabilize the boy, Elena's hands burning but relentless. When rescue crews finally freed the child, she carried him from shadow into light, the weight of his life etched onto every strained muscle. At the hospital, Elena's battlefield skills reshaped emergency protocols and expectations alike. Yet Dr. Cross's scowl never wavered, his opposition swelling with every act of defiance masked as heroism. Elena's suspended status loomed, but the war she'd fought years ago was no longer just a memory. It was the crucible shaping her fight for recognition. A raging storm of dust, smoke, and distant sirens swallowed the street as Elena Vargas stepped onto the rubble-strewn scene of a collapsed 4-story residential building. The air was thick with panic, cries of the injured weaving through the cacophony of commands barked by firefighters and emergency crews. Get triage set up at the east corner. Keep those ambulances moving, Elena ordered firmly, her voice slicing through noise, cutting through chaos with years of battlefield-honed authority. She moved swiftly through the twisted wreckage, scanning with hawk-like precision. Every fragment could conceal a life. Her gaze locked onto a child's faint cry. A small boy trapped beneath chunks of concrete and exposed rebar. Dropping to her knees, Elena found Mateo, a pale 10-year-old with crushed legs. His eyes fluttered weakly, but held steady on hers as she pressed gauze to a severed artery, feeling the steady seep of warm blood. You're going to be okay, Mateo. I'm here, she whispered, voice low, but infused with steady reassurance. Nearby, the unstable building groaned, a warning rumble that sent adrenaline surging anew. Firefighters barked evacuation orders, but Elena refused to release the fragile thread holding Mateo's life. Nurse Hayes, grab the pressure bandages and tourniquets, now, Elena commanded. I need 2 units here, stat. Jordan Hayes appeared, supplies in hand, eyes burning with resolve. No questions, no hesitation. She understood Elena's unspoken vow. Minutes stretched interminably as they fought to stabilize Mateo. Elena's hands worked with aching precision, every movement a balance of urgency and care. She fed him sips of water, murmuring calming words in Spanish, the cadence wrapping around Mateo like a protective shield. Around them, first responders coordinated like clockwork. Elena divided the chaos into sectors, assigning teams with military efficiency. Blue sedan with driver conscious, minivan with child inside, pickup truck on its side. The training ingrained deep within her resurfaced, despite years lost to civilian life. Suddenly, the crushed wreck shifted dangerously, dust filling the air as a secondary collapse threatened the fragile rescue. "Evacuate! Everyone out!" a firefighter shouted. But Elena didn't budge. Her hands anchored to the wound, refusing to let go. Her mind leapt back to Fallujah, the burning Humvee, trapped Marines, the weight of survival pressing like concrete. Minutes later, with precise hydraulic cutters slicing steel ribs apart, they freed Mateo. Elena lifted him carefully, body trembling, but heart unyielding. In the ambulance, Mateo's breathing faltered, a tension pneumothorax. Without hesitation, Elena located the intercostal space and performed a needle decompression. The hiss of escaping air was followed by a gradual return of color and steady breath. As they raced to Metro General, Elena's hands never ceased their vigilant care. Back at the hospital, Dr. Aisha Kim watched Elena's every move with a mix of appraisal and respect. "That was a battlefield technique," Kim noted quietly, as Elena cleaned her equipment. "Where did you learn to do that?" Elena's lips pressed into a thin line. "Out there." Kim nodded slowly. "If only we had more like you." The bruises on Elena's hands throbbed, a testament to battles fought and lives saved. But through the dust and adrenaline, the lines between soldier and paramedic blurred, and the war inside Elena deepened as looming questions promised to unravel her carefully guarded past. Amid the flashing lights and wail of sirens, the city's pulse quickened with urgency. Mateo, fragile and pale from his ordeal beneath the rubble, lay transfixed on the ambulance gurney. Elena Vargas's hands burned from the relentless pressure, but she refused to relax her grip on the severed artery, steadying the bleeding with a practiced precision born of battle and trauma rooms alike. The concrete-crushed boy's chest rose and fell shallowly, heartbeat erratic. Elena's breath tracked the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor. Her mind alerted every detail. The faint wheeze in his lungs, the pallor creeping into his fingertips. "Gotta keep him stable," she muttered, fingers searching for a vein with unwavering focus. An IV line slid in, fluids started, then the subtle signs shifted. Mateo's chest didn't expand evenly. Suddenly, his oxygen saturation began dropping. "Tension pneumothorax," Elena said sharply, prepped the needle decompression kit with hands that refused to shake despite exhaustion. Needle decompression, second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. Her fingers pinpointed the spot, breath held taut, and then a hiss echoed as the needle punctured the pleural cavity. Air rushed free. Slowly, Mateo's color returned, breaths deepened, eyes fluttered open. Dr. Aisha Kim, watching closely, nodded with quiet approval. "This is battlefield medicine." "Where'd you learn this, Vargas?" Elena only shrugged, inhaling deeply, steadying herself for the miles yet to cover. As the ambulance tore through the city streets toward Metro General, Elena maintained clinical vigilance, eyes darting between monitors and child, hands ready at any moment to leap into action. She whispered comforting words in Spanish, echoes of soft voices from a past shadowed in sand and warfare. Inside the hospital, Elena's deft care didn't go unnoticed. Nurse Jordan Hayes shadowed her, admiration mingling with concern. "You move like a soldier, but you're one of us now," Jordan observed quietly. Elena nodded, the weight of her two worlds settling heavy on her shoulders. Later, as she cleaned her gear in the ambulance bay, the day's adrenaline ebbing, Elena's thoughts spun. Dr. Martin Cross's unresolved disapproval loomed in the background, a constant reminder that while she saved lives by necessity, the bureaucracy could crush her spirit just as surely. Yet amidst the rubble of crisis and conflict, Elena Vargas stood unyielding. Her hands scarred but unwavering, a vital force bridging war's brutal lessons and the fragile hope of healing. This was far from over. A quiet storm settled over Metro General's parking lot as the evening sky darkened, the hospital's illuminated windows glowing like watchtowers against the coming night. Elena Vargas sat silently in the break room, the low hum of fluorescent lights above her, the only soundtrack to her spiraling thoughts. Her hands rested on a faded, creased photo, the vaccine-stained image of her in desert camo, surrounded by brothers in arms. She hadn't touched it in years, preferring the numbness to memory, but the arrival of Sergeant First Class Ethan Blake had cracked open the box she'd locked away. Luis Ortega found her locked in thought, his presence a gentle reminder she wasn't alone in her battles. "You froze when Blake came in," Luis said softly, breaking the silence. Elena's jaw tightened. "That's a battlefield hangover. You learn to compartmentalize. But some things refuse to stay boxed up." Luis nodded knowingly. "Tell me about the girl." Her eyes darkened. Amira, the 8-year-old Iraqi child caught in the crossfire who slipped from her grasp despite every effort. Elena's voice was barely above a whisper. "I couldn't save her, no matter what I did." Luis pulled up a military report on his phone, a detailed after-action review. "You saved 3 civilians that day by directing others to help. You did more than you know." Elena's breath hitched, a frail hope against years of self-doubt. The next morning, the hospital's sterile tension tightened as Dr. Martin Cross prepared to confront Elena in an emergency board hearing called to review her suspension. Cross's voice was accusing, cataloging every breach of protocol, every reckless act performed without hospital approval. He portrayed Elena as a rogue agent risking the hospital's reputation. But then Dr. Aisha Kim stood, calm and steady. "Outcomes matter," she declared. "Every patient Elena helped is alive. Her battlefield skills saved lives when ours were failing." Nurse Jordan Hayes added her voice. "She's not just saving patients. She's teaching us to save lives under pressure." The room shifted. The board's stern faces softened. Then Elena was asked why she hid her military past. She answered with raw honesty, "Because I didn't want to be defined by what I couldn't save. I wanted to be judged by what I do now." While the board deliberated, a handful of figures appeared at the hospital's entrance. Gunny Rodriguez and 6 of the Marines Elena had saved years ago, standing in dress uniforms with steady resolve. Rodriguez's voice was firm but full of unmistakable respect. "Corporal Elena Vargas saved my life and the lives of these men in Fallujah. She's the finest combat medic I've ever served with." One by one, the Marines shared their stories. The flames escaped. The bullet wounds staunched. The impossible survival made possible by Elena's hands. Elena's breath caught as her burden lightened. Recognition from those who knew the depths rather than the surface. From the hospital balcony, Dr. Cross watched, conflicted. The board chair's voice cut through the moment, announcing the decision. Elena's suspension was lifted. Instead, a new position was created for her, Director of Tactical Emergency Medicine. Shock rippled through the room. Cross protested, but the chair ruled in favor of results and leadership shown. Elena's acceptance was calm, but resolute. "I'll do this on one condition. If protocols need changing, they must change, without delay." Her words echoed like a promise, a turning point not just for her, but for an entire institution on the brink of transformation. The hospital boardroom was silent except for the hum of air conditioning and the occasional shuffle of papers. Elena Vargas sat at the center table, her posture rigid, hands folded tightly in her lap. Across from her, Dr. Martin Cross stood with a folder thick with documentation, his expression triumphant. "Ms. Vargas violated protocols repeatedly," Cross began, his voice sharp and clinical. "Field amputations, needle decompressions, battlefield techniques performed without physician oversight. She exceeded her scope of practice and put this hospital at legal risk." He paused, letting the weight of his accusations settle over the room. Furthermore, she deliberately omitted her military service from her employment application. A clear breach of trust. Elena's jaw tightened, but she remained silent, eyes fixed on the table. The board chair, a silver-haired woman named Dr. Patricia Monroe, leaned forward. "Ms. Vargas, do you dispute these allegations?" Before Elena could respond, Dr. Aisha Kim rose from her seat. "May I speak?" Dr. Monroe nodded. Kim approached the center of the room, her voice steady and measured. "I've reviewed every case Ms. Vargas has touched in the past 6 months. Her patient survival rate is 98%, including cases with predicted mortality rates exceeding 60%. She placed a printout on the table. The man whose arm she amputated? Alive? The woman with the aortic dissection she diagnosed in the field? Alive? The 10-year-old boy trapped under rubble? Alive and recovering. Every single patient she's treated is breathing because of her interventions." Cross interjected sharply. Outcomes don't justify breaking protocol. Protocols exist to save lives, Kim countered. When they fail, we need people who can adapt. That's what combat medics do. They make impossible decisions under impossible conditions. And they get results. Nurse Jordan Hayes stood next. Ms. Vargas doesn't just save patients. She teaches the rest of us to think critically under pressure. I've learned more from watching her work than from any manual. The room shifted. Murmurs rippled through the board members. Dr. Monroe turned to Elena. Ms. Vargas, why didn't you disclose your military background? Elena finally looked up, her voice quiet but steady. Because I didn't want to be defined by what I couldn't save. I wanted to be judged by what I do now. Her words hung in the air, raw and unfiltered. Cross's expression hardened. That's not an answer. That's evasion. Elena met his gaze. I left the Navy because I carried too much weight from the ones I lost. I thought if I could just focus on saving the ones in front of me, I could move forward. But you're right. I should have been honest from the beginning. Dr. Monroe studied her carefully. And yet, you've saved more lives here than most medics do in a career. Elena didn't respond. She simply nodded. The board chair leaned back. We'll deliberate. You're dismissed for now. Elena stood, walked toward the door, and stepped into the hallway where the weight of uncertainty pressed down on her shoulders. Outside, the Marines waited. Gunny Rodriguez and the squad, standing in formation, their presence a silent testament to the lives she'd already saved. The hospital atrium buzzed with its usual midday rhythm. Patients shuffling toward appointments, families waiting anxiously, the sterile scent of antiseptic mingling with stale coffee. Elena Vargas stepped through the double doors, her mind still processing the board hearing, when she froze. 7 Marines stood in formation, dressed in crisp service uniforms, their presence commanding immediate attention. At the center was Gunnery Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez, his weathered face breaking into a rare smile as his eyes locked onto Elena. Corporal Vargas, Rodriguez said, his voice carrying across the atrium. He snapped a salute, sharp and precise. The other Marines followed in unison. Elena's breath caught. Her hand instinctively rose to return the salute, muscle memory overriding shock. Tears threatened the corners of her eyes, but she held them back. Gunny, she managed, voice thick with emotion. Rodriguez stepped forward, his bearing still military, but his eyes softened with gratitude. We owe you our lives, Elena. All of us. One by one, the Marines stepped forward. Sergeant First Class Ethan Blake, leaning on crutches but standing tall. You pulled me from a burning Humvee when everyone else thought I was gone. Corporal Daniel Jackson, his voice steady. You saved both my legs. Doctors said I'd never walk again. You proved them wrong. Private First Class Carlos Mendez, younger but no less sincere. You kept me breathing for 20 minutes under fire. I wouldn't be here without you. Each testimony hit Elena like a wave. Years of buried guilt and self-doubt crashing against the reality of lives saved, futures restored. Rodriguez reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded American flag, its edges worn but reverent. This is from the battalion. We never got to give it to you when you left. It's time you had it. Elena's hands trembled as she accepted the flag, its weight both symbolic and crushing. The atrium had gone silent, hospital staff and patients watching the scene unfold. Dr. Aisha Kim stood near the elevator, arms crossed, a smile playing at her lips. Nurse Jordan Hayes wiped tears from her eyes. From the second-floor balcony, Dr. Martin Cross watched, his expression unreadable. The defiance he'd clung to seemed to waver in the face of undeniable proof. Elena Vargas wasn't just a paramedic. She was a warrior who'd earned her place. The board chair, Dr. Patricia Monroe, stepped forward from the administrative wing, flanked by 2 other board members. The room's attention shifted. Ms. Vargas, Monroe began, her voice carrying authority tempered with respect. The board has reached a decision. Elena stood straighter, the flag clutched against her chest, bracing for whatever came next. Monroe's expression softened. You are not terminated. Instead, we are creating a new position, Director of Tactical Emergency Medicine, and we're offering it to you. Gasps rippled through the atrium. Elena's eyes widened. disbelief flooding her features. Dr. Kim stepped forward to explain. You'll train emergency staff in combat-tested techniques, develop new trauma protocols, and lead our crisis response teams. Full clinical authority. Dr. Cross descended the stairs, his voice cutting through the moment. I object. She's not a physician. This sets a dangerous precedent. Monroe turned to him, voice firm. Dr. Cross, your objection is noted and overruled. Results matter. Ms. Vargas has delivered results beyond question. Elena looked at the Marines, at Kim, at Hayes, then back to Monroe. I accept. On one condition. If protocols need to change, we change them immediately. No bureaucratic delays. Monroe nodded. Agreed. Rodriguez and the squad erupted in cheers, their voices echoing through the atrium. Hospital staff joined in applause, the sound building like a wave of recognition long overdue. Elena exhaled slowly, the weight she'd carried for 17 years finally beginning to lift. The board's decision echoed through Metro General like a seismic shift. Elena Vargas, once a suspended paramedic facing termination, was now the hospital's first director of tactical emergency medicine. The announcement rippled through staff channels, sparking conversations in break rooms, hallways, and operating theaters. Dr. Martin Cross stood in his office, jaw clenched, staring at the formal letter from the board. His objections had been overruled, his authority challenged. The woman he'd tried to remove was now his equal, perhaps more. He picked up the phone, hesitated, then set it down. For the first time in years, Cross questioned whether control mattered more than outcomes. Meanwhile, Elena stood in what would become her new office, a converted conference room on the 3rd floor with windows overlooking the ambulance bay. The space was bare, except for a desk, 2 chairs, and a whiteboard covering one wall. Dr. Aisha Kim entered, carrying a stack of binders, trauma protocols, current EMS guidelines, and hospital policy manuals. Consider this your starting library. Elena flipped through one binder, her eyes scanning outdated procedures that prioritized paperwork over speed. Half of these would get people killed in the field. Kim smiled. That's why you're here. Change them. Over the next weeks, Elena worked relentlessly. She drafted new hemorrhage control protocols based on military tourniquet applications. She introduced tactical triage systems that prioritized survivability over severity. She mandated needle decompression training for all paramedics and nurses. Resistance came swiftly. Senior physicians balked at taking orders from a non-doctor. Emergency staff questioned techniques that contradicted textbook medicine. Elena didn't argue. She demonstrated. During a mass casualty drill, she led 30 residents, nurses, and paramedics through a simulated building collapse. Her commands were precise, her expectations unyielding. Within minutes, the chaos transformed into coordinated efficiency. One resident, a young doctor named Chen, approached afterward. That was unlike anything we learned in med school. Med school prepares you for controlled environments, Elena replied. Real trauma doesn't wait for controlled environments. Dr. Kim observed from the sidelines, impressed. The National EMS Board reached out. They want you to consult on new combat medicine integration guidelines. Elena paused. National? Your methods are working, Elena. People notice results. That evening, Elena visited Mateo's room. The boy sat upright, color returned to his cheeks, a soccer ball resting on his lap. His mother, Maria, stood and embraced Elena tightly. You gave me my son back, Maria whispered in Spanish. Mateo grinned. I'm playing again next month. Coach says I'm team captain. Elena crouched beside his bed. Then you better practice. Captains lead by example. Maria handed Elena a photograph. Mateo in his soccer uniform, smiling wide, arms raised in victory. For you. So you remember what you fight for. Back in her office, Elena placed Mateo's photo on the wall beside the faded image from Fallujah. 2 moments, 17 years apart, connected by the same hands that refused to quit. Her phone buzzed. A text from Gunny Rodriguez. A group photo of the entire squad reunited at a barbecue. All alive, all thriving. The caption read, Because of you. Elena stared at the image, tears finally breaking free. For the first time since Fallujah, She allowed herself to believe she'd done enough. A trauma alert sounded overhead. Elena grabbed her gear and headed for the ER. Not running from the past anymore, but carrying it forward as armor, not burden. The war she'd fought in Fallujah was over. The one she fought now, saving lives one protocol at a time, had just begun. 6 months had transformed Metro General Hospital in ways no one anticipated. The new training facility occupied the entire East Wing's lower level, a state-of-the-art simulation center, equipped with trauma mannequins, tactical gear, and crisis scenario technology that rivaled military installations. Elena Vargas stood before 30 eager faces, residents, nurses, paramedics, even 2 attending physicians who'd swallowed their pride to learn from someone without an MD. She wore hospital scrubs now, but her bearing remained unmistakably military. Tactical triage isn't about who screams loudest, Elena began, her voice steady and commanding. It's about who lives if you make the right choice in 3 seconds. She activated the simulation. A multi-vehicle highway collision with 8 casualties, limited resources, and a clock counting down. The trainees moved hesitantly at first, overwhelmed by chaos programmed to mirror reality. Elena walked among them, correcting hand placements, redirecting priorities. That patient has a tension pneumothorax. You have 40 seconds before he codes. Move. A young nurse named Rivera hesitated, then performed the needle decompression with shaking hands. The mannequin's stats stabilized. Rivera exhaled, relief flooding her face. Good, Elena said quietly. Now do it again until your hands don't shake. By session's end, the team had saved 6 of 8 patients, a passing grade in Elena's world, where perfection was impossible, but excellence was mandatory. Dr. Aisha Kim waited outside the training room, arms crossed but smiling. The National EMS Board approved your protocol recommendations. They're rolling out nationwide next quarter. Elena nodded, the weight of responsibility settling comfortably on her shoulders. And the resistance? Cross submitted his resignation this morning. He's taking a position at a research hospital. Less chaos, more control. Elena felt no triumph, only understanding. Some people were built for order. Others thrived in the storm. Later that afternoon, Elena visited Mateo's room one final time before his discharge. The 10-year-old sat cross-legged on the bed, fully healed, his mother packing belongings into a duffel bag. Mateo jumped up when Elena entered. Look! He walked without limping, did a small jump. Dr. Kim says I'm cleared for soccer. Maria embraced Elena, tears streaming. We owe you everything. Elena crouched to Mateo's level. You owe me nothing. Just promise you'll play hard and live well. Mateo saluted, childish but earnest. Yes, ma'am. Maria handed Elena a framed photograph. Mateo in his soccer uniform, mid-kick, joy radiating from every pixel. So you never forget why you fight. Back in her office, Elena placed the photo beside the one from Fallujah. 2 images, 2 wars, 1 constant thread. The refusal to surrender when lives hung in balance. Her desk phone rang. She answered. Director Vargas? This is Colonel Sarah Mitchell from Walter Reed Medical Center. We'd like to discuss adapting your trauma protocols for forward surgical teams. Elena straightened. I'm listening. The conversation lasted an hour. Plans forming for a collaboration that would bridge civilian and military emergency medicine in unprecedented ways. When Elena finally hung up, she walked to the window overlooking the ambulance bay. Lights flashed as a rig pulled in, paramedics moving with practiced urgency. She recognized the rhythm, the dance between chaos and control she'd spent 17 years mastering. A trauma alert sounded overhead. Elena grabbed her go bag and headed for the stairs, not running from the past anymore, but carrying its lessons forward. The war in Fallujah had ended years ago, the one she fought now, saving lives one protocol, one trainee, one patient at a time, had just begun in earnest. And this time, she wasn't fighting alone. The young woman sitting across from Elena Vargas had the unmistakable look of someone carrying invisible weight. Shoulders hunched slightly forward, eyes that tracked every movement in the room, hands that couldn't quite stay still. Her name tag read, Angela Torres, paramedic. Thanks for meeting with me, Director Vargas. Angela said quietly. voice carrying the faint rasp of someone who'd screamed themselves hoarse too many times. Elena gestured to the chair. "Luis told me you've been struggling. Talk to me." Angela hesitated. Then the words came in a rush. "I served in Afghanistan. 2 tours as an army combat medic. Saw things. Did things. Came home. Got certified as a paramedic. Thought I could handle it. But you can't," Elena said gently. Not a question. Angela shook her head. "Pediatric calls. Every time we get one, I freeze. I see their faces and I'm back in Kandahar with a kid who stepped on an IED. I tried everything I knew. But she," her voice broke, "she died in my arms." Elena's chest tightened with recognition. The same ghost she'd carried for 17 years. How old was she? 7. Her name was Zara. The room fell silent except for the distant hum of hospital machinery. Elena stood, walked to her office wall where 2 photographs hung side by side. One from Fallujah, one of Mateo in his soccer uniform. Her name was Amira, Elena said quietly, 8 years old. Caught in crossfire in Fallujah. I worked on her for 38 minutes under fire. She died anyway. Angela looked up, tears streaming. "How do you live with that?" Elena turned to face her. "You don't forget. You don't pretend it didn't happen. But you also don't let it define every choice you make moving forward." She sat back down. "I froze too, Angela. 6 months ago, a pediatric trauma came in, and I saw Amira's face instead of the patient's. For 3 seconds, I couldn't move. What changed? I pushed through. I got help. Therapy, peer support, honest conversations with people who understood. And eventually, the faces stopped controlling me." Angela wiped her eyes. "I don't know if I can do this." "You can," Elena said firmly. "Because you're here asking for help instead of running away. That's the hardest step." She pulled out a tablet, opened a training schedule. "I'm offering you a spot in the Tactical Emergency Medicine program. You'll train with others who've been where you are. You'll learn to separate past trauma from present crisis, and you'll have support every step." Angela stared at the screen, hope warring with fear. "What if I freeze again? Then we work through it. Together." Angela's hand steadied slightly. "Okay, I'm in." Elena smiled, the first genuine one in hours. "Good. Training starts Monday. Don't be late." After Angela left, Elena returned to her wall of photographs. She added a third. A group shot from last week's training graduation. 15 new trauma specialists ready to save lives. Her phone buzzed. A text from Gunny Rodriguez. A photo of the entire squad reunited at a backyard barbecue. All alive, all thriving, raising beers to the camera. The caption read, "Because of you, always." Elena smiled, pocketed her phone and grabbed her tactical vest. The trauma alert system crackled overhead. Mass casualty drill in progress. All teams to stations. She walked briskly to the simulation center where her trainees waited. Faces eager and focused. They moved with precision now, applying techniques Elena had drilled into them through repetition and real-world scenarios. As she observed the controlled chaos, Elena realized something profound. The war she'd fought in Fallujah had ended, but the battle she waged now, saving lives one protocol at a time, healing healers one conversation at a time, had just begun. And this time, she wasn't carrying the weight alone. The legacy she'd leave wouldn't be measured in medals or commendations, but in the lives saved by people she'd trained, inspired, and refused to let quit. Just like someone once refused to let her quit.